autogenous bone, harvested with a scraper, self-scraper, in the same zone, and then 30–40% of xenograft material. Bovine, porcine, the behavior of this biomaterial is similar. We don't have particular differences between these materials. It's important the presence of autogenous bone. Why? Not because the autogenous bone has osteoinductive activity. No. The autogenous bone is not able to perform an osteoinductive activity because in few minutes the autogenous bone diet are chicks without vascularization. They cannot perform the osteogenetic activity. But the autogenous bone is recognized from the osteoclast cells as a proper bone died, and it promotes the osteoclast cells action. And we know that the osteogenetic processes start after the osteoclast cells activation. Without the osteoclast cells activation, we don't have osteogenetic processes. And so the presence of autogenous bone is useful for that. Because the activation of the osteoclast cells, if we should use only xenograft material, is more difficult. And the regeneration of the bone delayed. Instead, the presence of the autogenous bone died, no osteoinduction, but only osteoconduction, promote the activity of the osteoclast cells. Then, after the grafting of the myometrium, we close the membrane on the top of the biomaterial, and we fix the membrane also on the buccal side. And you can see an interesting aspect or detail of the GBR, the dimension of the width of the bone regeneration, 12 millimeters. We pre-shaped the membrane with a data probe in order to define with precision this type of dimension. We wanted to have 12 millimeters on the molar area and 8 millimeters in the premolar area. You cannot stay concentrated only on the verticality. If you want to maintain the regenerated bone, you have to focus your attention also on the horizontality. Why? We said that the bone regeneration depends on two processes, two different processes: the endosteal activity and the periosteal activity. But when we use the non-absorbable titanium reinforced membrane, the periosteum is isolated. It cannot contribute to to the regeneration of the bone. And what does means? You could say, but I managed to get the bone regeneration in the meantime, again. But it changes the quality of bone. Without the presence of the periosteum, we don't have the external corticalization of the bone. And the cortical layer of the regenerated bone is the natural protection of the bone. So, when we remove the membrane after 6, 7, 8 months, the time of bone regeneration, we can observe radiologically, histologically, histomorphometrically, and clinically, we can observe that the quality of bone is poor, very poor. A modest quantity of the native bone. The bone is not such hard, sometimes it's soft, and we don't have corticalization. Histologically, histomorphometrically, it is a disaster. You work 8, 9, 10 months, do surgery with a lot of risk. You harvest the bone in order to evaluate the quality, and histologically, histomorphometrically, it's a shit. But this is the time in order to place the periosteum against the bone. Fortunately, it is the right time for the contribution of the periosteum activity. The periosteum activity has to be placed over the top of the bone with the perfect closure of the flaps in order to protect the delicate bone. But it is true that now we can gain the improving of the quality of the bone through the periosteum contact. It is true. With the increasing of the mineralization, with the increasing of the corticalization. But at the meantime, we have to pay a cost. We have to pay a cost. The periosteum is very aggressive. It's very aggressive. And while he tries to join it to the regenerated bone, on one hand, it contributes with the increasing of mineralization, the increasing of the corticalization. But on the other hand, it returns and contraction of the delicate bone. And we lose in a horizontal way on head 1.5/2 millimeters on each side. It means that after the maturation of the bone through the periosteum contact, we could lose between 3 and 4 millimeters of horizontal width. A big quantity. This is the reason why when perform the bone regeneration, we have to calculate the dimension of the new width in order to compensate the remodeling of the bone after the removal of the membrane. And the 12 millimeters is the ideal width in order to protect the bone, the implants, from 1.52 millimeters on each side of the implants if we should place an implant with 5 millimeters of diameter. 5 millimeters of diameter plus 2 millimeters on each side are 9 millimeters, less 3 millimeters that we could lose are 12 millimeters. It is the rationale for which I perform the GBR always with this dimension, 12 millimeters in molar area and 8 millimeters in premolar area. Then I place in this specific case some fibrous membrane, and I close perfectly the flaps. We can perform this surgical procedure even if the defect is severe, because we have the residual bone peak. Without the bone peak, the surgical predictability is limited. Pay attention. There is a difference between the possibility to perform bone regeneration or the risk to have complication. The surgical predictability is in relationship with the complication. If I had a high surgical predictability, probably I couldn't have complication. But it means that it isn't needed to have the bone peak in order to regenerate the bone. This is an old concept. We could regenerate the bone even if we shouldn't have the residual bone peak. But, and this is the different point of view, but the surgical predictability would be very low, because the risk of complication and infection would be very high. So we can regenerate the bone even if we don't have the big bone. Of course, if we have the big bone, we have a larger portion of the bone from we can have vascular support, cell stance, everybody that is needed for the bone regeneration. But if we shouldn't have a big bone, we can have bone regeneration again. But the risk of complication is very high. Why? Because when we elevate our flap, we destroy the periodontal attachment around the last tooth. We destroy it. But that periodontal attachment could be present with or without bone peak. Without bone peak, we had only connective tissue attachment. With the bone peak, we had connective tissue attachment and periosteum attachment. When we destroy the periodontal attachment with or without bone, if we want to have success in GBR, we have to restore again the periodontal attachment. Because differently, through the sulcus of the last tooth, the bacteria can penetrate inside and determine the infection of the GBR. Now, I describe the rationale for the bone peak, residual bone peak. So, If we analyze the timing of the restoring of the different layers of the periodontal attachment, we place at the first place the periosteum. The periosteum is very fast, immediately. The periosteum is the first part of the periodontal attachment that is restored when we place the flaps against the bone. Then the second is the connective tissue. Need 1 week, long time, against the root. And then the long epithelial attachment, 2 weeks. It means that if we have the bone peak, we can place the periosteum against the bone, and the restoring of the periodontal attachment is very fast. But if we don't have the bone peak, we can obtain the periodontal attachment through the connective tissue attachment. But we know that in order to restore the connective tissue attachment, we need at least 1 week. And during this long time, the risk of the infection are very high. This is the importance between a strategical concept that is relating the biological seal and mechanical seal. I changed my approach to the GBR and my results, because before this concept I had 6.8% of failure in GBR in consequence of the infection. 6.8, with a perfect closure of the flaps, not with the opening of the flaps, not with the early exposure of the flaps. Perfect closure of the flaps after 2 weeks infection. But then I understood that I had to work on this concept, obtain the biological seal, not mechanical seal. And sometimes we get mechanical seal when we can note that the flaps are perfectly closed against the neck of the tooth, but without the correct spatiality, condition for which we cannot restore the periodontal attachment. I try to understand you. Try to imagine that the head of the implants that you place at the time of the GBR is placed 1 millimeter more coronally than the residual bone peak. Or another solution, that the implants has been placed correctly, but when I put the biomaterial in excess was over the top of the head of the implants, and the level of the membrane is higher than the bone peak. Okay? In this way, when I place the flaps over the top of the regenerated area, can the periosteum get in contact with the residual bone peak? No. Because the bone peak is here, the level of the membrane is here, the flap is here, and the periosteum cannot get in contact with the bone peak. It means that we cannot have periosteal touch. But when your flap were closed perfectly around the last mechanical seal. And then, can the connective tissue restore its attachment against the cementum of the root? No, because the connective tissue is against the enamel. The flap has been moved to corners. Periosteum not in contact with the bone, no periosteal attachment. Connective tissue not in contact with the cementum, but with the enamel. No connective tissue attachment. So this is a mechanical seal. It means that it's perfectly close against the neck of the tooth. Did you understand? Close, but not biologically sealed. Because I didn't respect the spatiality of the flap. It's normal. If we wanted to close this kind of regeneration, we have to passivate perfectly the flap. We could speak for a long time of all guidelines that are important in order to reduce the risk of complication. All guidelines. But then at the end, if you don't passive the flaps, you cannot close for the first intention. Then. And look at this is a lingual flap. 3 centimeters of passivation. 3 centimeters. The correct application of the surgical procedure that I published in 2011 for the lingual flap and 2015 on the buccal flap. 4 centimeters for the buccal flap. Without damaging the vessels, no bleeding, never. It is the performance of the using of the blade with a very selected way. We perform a desiccation of the flap when we perform the buccal passivation flap. The detachment of the submucosa from the muscles in order to separate the unelastic portion of the flap from the elastic portion of the flap in order to move the flap in a significant way. 7 centimeters, not millimeters, centimeters of cornal displacement of the flap in order to cover, to protect, to close this GBR of 12 millimeters of verticality. And naturally, this is the new profile. We restore completely the missing oil. And it's very interesting to evaluate the behavior of the bone in relationship with the removal of the membrane and the placing of the periosteum against the bone. This is the case before the surgery, and this 11 months later. You can see that the bone is black-gray, is transparent. It hasn't mineralization. But in any case, after this time, I observed that the quality of bone doesn't change. It means that even if you maintain the barrier for a longer time, you don't have an improvement of the quality of bone. Why? Because if we wanted to improve the quality of bone, we have to place the periosteum in contact with the bone. And so, at that time, I removed the membrane. I elevated a foot thickness up. This is the bone. You can see that the bone is well compacted, but in the middle, in the center, where there was a maximum defect, the quality of bone is different from the lateral side, where there was a better vascularization. The inner part has a poor vascularization. But placing the periosteum against this non-matured bone, we can change completely the quality of bone. And so I close again the flaps in a way that we cannot have any risk of opening of the flaps. These sutures is similar to the GBR suture. It isn't a conventional interrupted suture. Because in case that we should have the opening of the flaps over the top of this non-naturally regenerated bone, the risk of the absorption would be very high. Because the bone is such delicate that in case of the opening of the flap, part of the bone could be absorbed. And so, if you don't want to have this kind of problem, you have to close perfectly the flaps at the time of membrane removal. Horizontal matrix sutures and interrupted sutures. And look at the different quality of bone after the periosteum contact. In 3 months, the same cut shows as the quality of bone before the removal of the membrane was poor, and in 3 months we can see the external corticalization of the bone. 3.5. Look at how the bone increases its density. How externally to the regenerated bone we can see a thin layer of cortical bone. Before we had it. 3.6. It's wonderful. This is the biology. Are not the skills of Marco Ronda. Biology. But we have to know the biology if you want to educate the bone. In the past, at the time of memory removal, in the past, the surgeon activated immediately the implants, placing the bone in contact with the saliva. The aggressivity of the bacteria of the mouth against the non-matured bone determined absorption. They had always absorption. But if we know that the bone is regenerated through the endosteal and periosteal activity, will be important or not, the periosteum? Yes, it is very important. But we have to give the correct time to the bone in order to be conditioned from the periosteum contact. And this one is calculated in 3 months. It means that in order to get a good maturation of the bone after the membrane removal, with the closing of the flaps and placing the periosteum against the bone, we need on average 3 months before to get the adhesion of the periosteum to the bone and the mineralization of the bone with corticalization of the sternal part. Then, when we have to activate the implants, we have to manage always the soft tissues, always. Because you can see that we lost completely the keratinized tissue band, we lost the depth of the fornix. So if we don't perform and reposition the alveolar mucosa with the grafting of the free gingival graft, we cannot have an adequate quality of tissue that are needed for the prognosis of our GBR, implant GBR. We cannot concentrate ourselves in the bone regeneration. Yes, bone regeneration is can have a longer prognosis if we had to this first procedure and second surgical procedure that involves the soft tissue management. And then, naturally, we have to prepare the template with the template. We define the ideal dimension and shape of the graft that we have to harvest in the palatal area. And then we place the graft in this specific case in lingual, occlusal, and buccal side in order to restore perfectly in three-dimensional way the missing keratinized tissue band. We have to stabilize perfectly the graft in the correct position and in perfect adhesion against the vascular bed in order to get a very fast and quick revascularization of the graft. And in this way, you can see that we restore the depth of the fornix. And the compressed and crossing sutures are anchored on the periosteum, apical portion of the periosteum that we left on the line, on the surface of the regenerated bone. 1 week. Bone regeneration, but also soft tissue management. We restore a big quantity of keratinized tissue band around the implants. We restore the depth of the fornix. And this is the maturation. A good seal, biological seal around the implants that needed for the prognosis of our implants. And the temporary crown or definitive crown, I don't remember. And from here, we restore three-dimensionally the missing bone volume, but also creating the condition for the good prognosis of our implants. So this is the one-stage approach. The combination of the vertical and horizontal bone regeneration and the immediate placing of the implants. Why one-stage approach? I can tell you that we have several reasons for why the one-stage approach is good, and other for which is better the two stages approach. There isn't only one ideal option. I have to be honest, after a long time of application of this procedure, now I prefer two stages approach for several reasons that I will describe. But when I have to perform a very little bone regeneration, horizontal bone regeneration, 2, 3, 4 millimeters, 5 millimeters, I use still the one-stage approach. The case that I have just presented today never and then never will be treated by me with a one-stage approach. Never. Because the application of the one-stage approach in those complex cases was performed in a period in which I was crazy. I wanted to demonstrate to the world that I was able to generate 10, 12, 13 millimeters with only 1 millimeters of implants placed. Challenging cases. I fight it against me. Now I have a different concept. I fight for the patient. Before, I don't want to have complications. Everything is organized for them, not for me. I changed. In the past, I was crazy. Now I changed my philosophy. And so I define very well which are the cases in which you can push because there are the conditions, or that is better to stay relaxed. And maybe propose another surgery, but each surgery that you propose has high percentages of success. But why one-stage approach? The stabilization of the membrane on the lingual side before affecting the biomaterial is helped by the presence of the implants. Why? Because I shaped the membrane as a box. I placed the box over the top of the implants, and you can stabilize the membrane before screwing the screws on the lingual side with your finger. You place your finger on top of the membrane. Below the membrane there are the heads of the implants. And you manage to define the position of the membrane, and when you found the correct position of the membrane, you stop the membrane with your finger. And while you are pushing your finger against the membrane and against the heads of the implant, you can fix the membrane on the lingual side, maintaining the position, the correct position of the membrane. When you don't have implant, you place the box, but if you place the finger over the top of the membrane, even if you have the titanium reinforcement, even if you place the biomaterial, but pushing the finger, the membrane can change the shape, the titanium shape can modify. It's very difficult to maintain the stability of the membrane without any risk of modifying the shape of the decay. Then, the correct positioning of the implants, if you place contextually to the GBR the implants, but not at chaos, not around with a surgical guide, even if you are fixing the implant in 2, 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters, 5 millimeters, but in any case, with a surgical guide, you can define with the implants the ideal spatiality of the bone volume that you want to regenerate. If naturally the project of the implants has been done with the prosthesis, the virtual prosthesis. It means that I planted the prosthesis in antagonist with the upper jaw. I place the virtual implants in relationship with the prosthesis, and then with the surgical guide, I place the implants in the ideal and correct position. It means that the implant gives me the position of the volume that I have to regenerate. Why is it such important? Because in the lower jaw, if we should place implants without any information of other adjacent teeth, the risk would be that our implants would be too straight and not inclinated in a lingual way. Because the correct position of the implants is not straight, but is with a gentle inclination in lingual way. And this inclination is measured in, on average, 12, 15 radius degrees. So, if we should regenerate the bone without this type of information, the presence of the implants, our regeneration could be performed straight. And when we go to place the implants inside the regenerated bone, we could find implants too buccally. Because if we want to place the implants correctly, we have to place them with a lingual inclination. This is the conventional and natural relationship between the upper and the lower teeth. The lower teeth in the posterior area are inclinated. So, with the presence the implant, the presence of the implants, we can define the correct spatiality of the bone regeneration. And then there isn't any doubt that the relationship between the surface of the implants and the regenerated bone is a true osseointegration. Because some authors in literature tried to say that when you place the implant that sticks out from the bone, the regeneration of the bone around the implants is real, but the relationship with the implant is not a proper osseointegration. But someone said that it was a fiber integration. and the implants were blocked for the residual native bone. And so I wanted to demonstrate that it's not correct. And so this is a classic case of vertical bone generation, in which I use this implant as a distance cruise. I perform a vertical bone generation with a non-absorbable titanium reinforced membrane, placing in the middle of the region. This implant has distance cruise. Then I grafted the biomaterial, a mix between autogenous bone plus xenograft material, blah blah blah. I close the membrane over the top of the biomaterial, fix the membrane on the lymph side. Everything has been done correctly. And then I waited for the maturation of the bone. And it is arrived at the time of membrane removal. I uncover the membrane with a full thickness flap approach. I remove the membrane. The quality of bone is not very good because the vascularization is poor. But during this stage, I remove the implants in the same place where I had to place another implant, a large implant. This was 3 millimeters wide, very thin, and instead I place an implant of 5 millimeters. And so I remove with a 3-5 the implant, and this is the bone attached clinically to the surface of the implants, and I analyze the relationship between them. And this is a very true osseointegration. Very true osseointegration. It isn't true that we have fiber integration. The regeneration of the bone contextually to the placing of the implants, around the implants that were exposed, determine a perfect osseointegration. Instead, this is the classic 2 stages approach. And 2 stages approach is a modality, a surgical procedure that separates the GBR for the placing of the implants. Before we perform the GBR, and after some months, when we believe that the generation of the bone is completed, it depends on the dimension of the defect. We remove the barrier and we can place the implants. This is a classic case, a very severe case for which it wasn't possible to place the implants contextually because the residual bone over the top of the nerve was very thin. And so we performed at the beginning the GBR. Look at the nerve on top of the ridge. We elevated 10, 11 millimeters in verticality and an inch to passivate the flap. The brushing technique, the technique that I published in 2015, is a very selective surgical procedure for which we can protect the integrity of the nerve without any risk of damaging it, but desiccating the submucosa from the muscle, we can extend the coronal displacement of the buccal flap for 3-4 centimeters. centimeters, respecting the integrity of the nerve. I perforated the bone, I shaped the membrane, 10, 14 millimeters. I defined the shaping with the dental probe, no random. I wanted to add a specific dimension of the width, and so I modified further the titanium with the using of the dental probe. Then I placed the membrane on the equal side. I have already described the rationale for which we started from the equal side. I washed perfectly the inner part of the membrane in order to decontaminate the pollution that are present on the surface of the membrane that I contaminated with the touching, during the operation of the stabilization of the membrane. I shifted the surface of the bone, and then I grafted the biomaterial. A big quantity of biomaterial in excess relating to the ideal level on which we want to place the membrane. In excess, because I want to get a perfect fitting between the membrane and the biomaterial. It means that if I place the biomaterial in excess, during the moving the membrane from the lingual to the buccal, pulling the membrane against the bone, I can press with my finger against the top of the membrane in order to adapt perfectly the membrane against the biomaterial, compressing the biomaterial and without leaving any space between the biomaterial and membrane. And then I close the membrane over the top of the biomaterial, fixing the membrane buccally, distally, occlusally, everywhere. I don't want to have any risk of contamination from the connective tissue. The competition of the connective tissue limits the possibility to get a complete bone regeneration. Inside of this space should be present also osteoblast cells or undifferentiated cell stems, not connective tissue or fibrotic tissue. And look at how we managed to reply the dimension of the shaped membrane and the stable dimension after that we place the membrane over the top of the biomaterial. The volume and the dimension are the same. 10 millimeters here, 14, 15 millimeters here. This is the importance of the pre-shaping membrane. And then I close the flaps with the horizontal matrix sutures that place face to face at least 5 millimeters on each side of the tissues, and then several interrupted sutures. The healing, no complication. If you pass it correctly the flaps, if you perform an correct timing of the suturing, you can limit type of tensions and get this kind of healing. And it's very, very interesting to evaluate the maturation of the bone as the first case that I presented in relationship with the periosteal contact. This was the time, the CBCT, in which I had to remove the membrane. The same day or the day before the removal of the membrane. You can see that the quality of bone is poor. We don't have mineralization, and I am sure that you could think, not from Mark, this bone will be absorbed completely. Are you thinking that this bone will be absorbed? Probably. I am not sure. We have to educate the bone. And so, I removed the membrane. This was the quality of bone. A block of bone. 11 millimeters in verticality, 15 millimeters in horizontality, a block of bone. But the quality is poor. The bone is very soft. And so, too soft in order to place the implants contextually. And so, I decided to remove the flaps in contact to promote the maturation of the bone and delayed the insertion of the implants after the maturation of the bone. And this is the characteristic of the bone 4 months later, after the periosteal contact. The bone is changed completely. Now we can see in some places the external corticalization and the improvement of the mineralization of the bone. At that time, we can elevate the flap, place the implants in the strong and well vascularized bone and close against the flap. A perfect seal of the wound over the top of the regenerated bone, always. So I waited for the integration, osseointegration of the implant. But now, as you can see, we have to manage the soft tissue. No fornix, no keratinized tissue bank. And so I elevated the half thickness flap. If you perform correctly this procedure, you have to arrive with soft tissue elevation until reaching the mental nerve. If you want to restore the depth of the furnace, you have to place the profile of alveolar mucosa at the level of the mental nerve. In this way, you manage to correct the depth of the fornix. In this way, you can avoid damaging the nerve during the suturing. Why? Because the alveolar mucosa has to be anchorated to the periosteum. But if I manage to see the mental nerve, I can avoid to engage the nerve with my suturing. Because the main risk of damage of the nerve is the reduction of the vascular support through the closure of some sutures. But you can avoid to damage the nerve if you manage to see the nerve. The nerve is here, my sutures is here, but it doesn't engage the nerve. So we place the mucosa on the level of the nerve. I protected the nerve with my sutures, and I left free the periosteum bed or vascular bed. I activated the implants contextually, and then I grafted a big free gingival graft. Stabilized against the vascular bed with several crossing and pressing sutures anchored to the periosteum and against the healing abutment in order to limit the risk of the necrosis of the graft. If we push the graft against the vascular bed, we help the revascularization of the graft in a short time, without the interposition of an hematoma. And this is the view after 1 week. A perfect integration of the graft. Perfect. Perfect integration, no necrosis. No necrosis. And this is the maturation of the graft. It is where there were 11 millimeters of verticality of vertical bone defect. But the success of this case or other case is the precise combination between bone regeneration and soft tissue management. Not only bone regeneration. And look at the perfect restoration of the fornix. That is an ideal condition in order to the physiological cleaning of our crowns. The food slides around the teeth and go down the fornix, and with the tongue or with the muscles, mimetic muscles of buccinatore muscle, we clean. But when we have the fornix, if we don't have fornix, probably when during the lunch break you eat a sandwich, half sandwich in your stomach, another half sandwich between your teeth, because it's very difficult, the maintenance of the ideal cleaning of crowns without the presence of the fornix. So if we should evaluate the one stage, two stages under technical point of view, and then under technical point of view, between 1 or 2, the more simple, technical, the more simple is the case number 1, the one stage. Technically, if we place the implants contextually, we have a more simple, a simpler surgical procedure. Because we can increase the bone graft stabilization. The presence of the implants increases the stabilization of the bone. And you know that the key factor of the GBR is the stabilization of the blood flow. The differentiation of the differentiated cell stance in osteoblast and not in fibroblast depends on the stabilization of the blood flow. And when we have the implants, biomaterial with the blood flow that is placed around the implant is more stable than the same situation when we don't have the implants. Then you can define the correct and ideal spatiality of the bone regeneration. But why is it such important to define the ideal spatiality of the bone regeneration? Because you could say, but for me it's important to have the bone. Then inside the bone I place the implant. For me, it's not important such spatiality. If you want to maintain the bone in long term, you have to respect the spatiality. Differently, the bone outside of the original spatiality is absorbed. The tongue muscular function and the buccinatore muscle function determine the remodeling of the bone in those bone regenerated bone that is outside of the native spatiality. If you place the bone more buccally, the buccinatore muscles remodeling, and you have big absorption in horizontal way. And if you place the implants in the middle of your regenerated bone, but place it too buccally, step by step, remodeling, exposure of the implants, periimplantitis. In the same way on the lingual side. So this is the reason why very important the spatiality of the bone regeneration. You have to evaluate the regeneration of the bone in medium long time, not in clinical evidence. The clinical evidence of regenerated bone in incorrect spatiality is perfect. Oh my God, look at, I removed the memory, look at fantastic bone. But if you look at that bone in long term, the bone reduces, disappears. And when you place the implants in a one-stage approach, if you place the implants correctly, with a surgical guide, with a correct planning, with the study of the prosthesis, in that way you can have an indication where is placed the center of the implants, or the crown. Around the implants, we have to regenerate the bone, buccally and equally in harmonic way. Then you can place your finger over the top of the implant during the stabilization of the memory. And this is technical point of view. I don't know who of you perform the GBR with this memory. But probably in the future, when you perform, you should perform this procedure without implants, and you try to place your finger in order to stabilize the membrane when you have to fix on the lingual side, you remember my words. Oh my God, in 2025, Marco said, if you have the implants, you help. Without the implants, it's very difficult. And then you have to harvest a reduced bone quantity, because a part of the volume is filled from the presence of the implants. Biological point of view, 1 or 2? 2. The best under the biological point of view is a 2 stages approach. Why? At the time of implant placement, it means that I performed the bone regeneration. I waited 8 or 9 months for the bone regeneration. Now is the time of membrane removal, and during the second stage I can place the implants. Okay? At the time of implant placement, the osteotomies develop bone damage. I am very happy when I create bone damage. I am very happy because the damage of the bone is the booster of the osteogenetic processes. When I perform the damage of the bone, I activate the osteoclast cells. I have already said how these type of cells are important in the process of the bone regeneration. And so, at time of implant placement, I damage against the bone with the osteotomies. And I active again the bleeding. I damage the vessels, and the vessels are activated in new proliferation. It means that this second stage promotes again a new activity or osteogenetic activity. It means that during the second stage, the quality of bone improves in very short time from the insertion of the implants. Because biologically, we are pushing on the maturation of the bone. This is why biologically is better 2 stages. A clinical point of view, 1 to 2. Always 2. Several reasons. The surgical time is shorter than 1 stage. If you wanted to place implant in an atrophy, even if you have the surgical guide, but you need much time because there is a nerve. You don't want to have risk to damage the nerve. And so at least for 3 implants, 30, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, in order to prepare everything correctly. So the surgical timing is shorter than 1 stage. And just for that, the morbidity is reduced with less pain and swelling. For the patient, is better. 2 stage, short surgery, no pain, no swelling. In case of modest, incomplete bone regeneration, sometimes you don't manage to regenerate the bone until the top of the memory. But if you place the implants, it is a problem. Because part of the implant is unprotected by the bone. Instead, if you perform the bone regeneration, and instead to gain 11 millimeters, to gain 9 millimeters, which is the problem? You can place inside the bone 9 millimeters the implants. Yeah. And then the contamination risk is reduced because the surgical site is less manipulated and the surgical time is shorter. It means that we have less risk of infection. Everything is more simple, no manipulation, no long time, no variables in the surgery. And so in short time, I complete the surgery and the risk of infection related to complications are limited. So this is the analysis of under different point of view, one or two stages approach. If I have to give you my opinion, is that I use one stage approach when I have to perform limited GBR in horizontal cases, 2, 3, 4, 5 millimeters in horizontal, 1 millimeters in vertical, modest surgery, 3 millimeters in vertical, no more. But each time I have to perform and severe bone regeneration, challenging bone regeneration, and 10, 8, 9, big horizontality. So when the biological condition of the site is less performing, I prefer the using of two stages approach. Okay, it is the time of lunch. We are respecting the perfect timing. See you later in the second session in the afternoon, and good lunch everybody.
Xin được cảm ơn bác sĩ Marco cho bài báo cáo.